The loser has arrived. Those words hit me like a slap across the face the moment I walked through the front door. My sister Neha's voice, sharp and loud, cut through the room like a blade. Everyone at the table, my parents, uncles, aunts, cousins, paused mid-conversation. Some looked shocked, some amused, and some just smirked. I could almost hear the unspoken judgment vibrating in the air. For a moment, I froze, holding the small box of homemade pumpkin muffins I had brought. My palms went cold, and I could feel my stomach twist into knots. My face burned, my heart raced, and my mind scrambled for words, but there were none. How could there be? The room seemed to shrink around me, as if all eyes were weighing me down. Thanksgiving had always been a day of family warmth and gratitude. But this year, no. For the past several years, it had become a yearly ritual of shame, comparison, and subtle cruelty. Neha, my younger sister by 2 years, had changed so much since she got married. Money had turned her from the bright, mischievous girl I grew up with into someone cold, sharp, and relentless. She had married into wealth, bought a big house, expensive cars, and suddenly everyone treated her like a queen. And me? I was just the background, the forgotten child who could never quite measure up. I swallowed hard and tried to steady myself. I had been expecting some jab from her, yes. But this public humiliation? It was worse than I imagined. The laughter that followed her announcement felt like nails on my chest. My father gave an awkward chuckle, trying to diffuse the tension, but it only made it worse. My mother's eyes met mine for a brief moment, a flicker of sympathy, perhaps, but she quickly looked away. My uncle whispered something to my aunt, smirking. My cousins exchanged looks, clearly entertained by my discomfort. I walked toward the table, keeping my head down, clutching the muffins as if they were armor. Neha's eyes followed me, sharp and calculating, her smile too wide, too fake. "Sit," she said in that sweet, mocking tone that made my blood boil. I obeyed silently, sliding into the chair across from her husband, Rohan, who barely looked up from his plate. I wondered if he even knew how cruel she was in these moments, or if he was just used to her theatrics. As I sat, the tension in the room became almost suffocating. The smell of roasted turkey, pumpkin pie, and mashed potatoes was supposed to be comforting. Instead, it felt heavy and oppressive. Every bite I took seemed to echo in my ears, mingling with the whispers, the stifled giggles, and the occasional sarcastic comment from Neha. "You're late," she said after a pause, her tone sharp as a blade. "But I guess losers don't follow rules anyway." The laughter was immediate. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from anger and humiliation. I forced myself to keep a neutral expression, but inside I was furious, not at her alone, at the entire family, at how they had allowed this behavior, laughed at it, and turned it into tradition, at how years of comparison and criticism had left invisible scars that no one seemed to care about. I remembered all those years growing up, being told I was too slow, too weak, too unambitious, hearing, "Why can't you be more like Neha?" over and over, until I started believing it myself, quietly excelling in school, in life, only for it to be dismissed as barely enough, watching her achievements celebrated, while mine were ignored or belittled. I had learned to stay quiet, to endure, to smile when it hurt most. I had built resilience, yes, but it had come at the cost of constant self-doubt. And now, sitting here, I realized the resentment that had been quietly growing inside me for years was ready to boil over. Neha, oblivious to any of my inner turmoil, leaned back in her chair and continued her performance. "I hope your side gigs are going well," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Paying rent yet, or still barely scraping by?" I took a slow breath, keeping my voice calm, even as my hands tightened into fists under the table. "They're going fine," I said softly. "No need to brag yet. The work I had done in the past year, the projects, the certifications, the contracts in progress, none of them were common knowledge. I was quietly building something strong, something that would speak louder than any sarcastic remark. Her husband, Rohin, glanced at me, smirking slightly. Neha noticed his expression and laughed. See, even he agrees. You're just barely keeping up. I forced a laugh. Inside, I was shaking. I wondered if this is what the entire evening would be like. Endless humiliation, endless comparisons, endless sharp words. But then a small seed of resolve took root inside me. I won't stay small forever. I won't let them define my worth. I glanced around the table, taking in every smug look, every whispered comment. They had no idea what I had been doing behind the scenes. They had no idea how hard I had been working. They had no idea that in a few weeks the tables might turn completely, and not just for me, but for the first time in my life, I would be untouchable in their eyes. And yet, I had to sit there for now. Smile, nod, pretend to be okay, watch her triumph in her little kingdom, all the while knowing the storm I had been preparing was coming. Because this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Dinner continued, but Neha wasn't done. She found every opportunity to jab, to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. So, she said, swirling her wine glass, any updates on your so-called career? Or are you still freelancing for pennies? Her words landed with precision. The laughter that followed was cruel and cutting. Rohin smirked beside her, enjoying the performance, while the rest of the family murmured, nodding in agreement. My father cleared his throat awkwardly. My mother's eyes darted nervously between us, trying to maintain peace. I kept my calm. Inside, though, anger and determination churned like a storm. They had no idea what I had been doing these past months. While they mocked me, I had been quietly building my life, not for them, not for validation, but for myself. I had left a toxic job months ago. I had spent sleepless nights learning cybersecurity, taking online courses, earning certifications, and building my own consultancy. I had networked quietly, reached out to small businesses, and slowly gained trust with projects that no one in my family would ever consider respectable. My work was meticulous, detailed, and professional. Soon, it would speak louder than their jokes ever could. Neha leaned forward, her tone almost gleeful. I heard about that one company you helped. A small audit or something. Don't tell me it actually impressed anyone. I swallowed, keeping my composure. Yes, it did, I said calmly. And it caught the attention of some people you would consider important. Her smirk faltered for a second, but she quickly masked it. The table went quiet, sensing tension, though none of them knew the storm about to hit. Then Rohin's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, expecting a routine message. His face changed. The smirk dropped. A subtle panic crept in. He excused himself, stepping outside. Everyone noticed. Even Neha's smugness wavered. Minutes passed. I could feel my heart pounding. But I remained still, keeping my expression neutral. I didn't need to act. Patience was my ally. Rohin returned, looking pale and shaken. It was my boss, he muttered. His voice trembled slightly, betraying his usual confidence. Neha leaned forward eagerly. And he wants to meet you, Rohin said, nodding at me. They want to discuss a lead consultant position. Your audit report impressed them more than anything they've seen in years. The room froze. Laughter had died instantly. Forks hovered midair. Eyes widened. Neha's face turned red, not with pride, but embarrassment. Are you serious? She whispered, incredulous. Rohin nodded stiffly. Yes, and they specifically mentioned your work prevented a major system breach. Without it, the losses would have been catastrophic. The humiliation had flipped. The loser they had mocked, laughed at, and looked down upon was suddenly the one standing above them, quietly untouchable. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My silence and calm demeanor spoke volumes. Inside, though, a surge of satisfaction warmed me. Years of insults, comparisons, and belittlement had finally met their answer. Not with revenge in words, but with success that couldn't be denied. I realized in that moment that my growth, my patience, and my determination were more powerful than their sarcasm, pride, and wealth. The family's arrogance had blinded them to one simple truth. You cannot measure someone's worth by appearances, status, or loud declarations at a dinner table. And tonight, their eyes were forced to see what I had quietly built. Dinner finally ended, and everyone began clearing their plates. Neha lingered near me, her voice low, almost fragile. Why didn't you tell us about your work?" she asked, her tone trembling, unsure whether she was angry or ashamed. I looked at her calmly, meeting her gaze for the first time in years. Because every time I shared something, it was met with mockery. Every effort I made was minimized or laughed at. I didn't need your approval. I needed to build my life on my own terms. Her lips quivered. Did I really hurt you that much?" I paused. My answer was measured but firm. "You didn't hurt me. You shaped me. You showed me exactly who I didn't want to become." Rohin stood beside her, awkward and silent. He avoided my eyes, realizing for the first time the extent of his wife's cruelty. My father, normally stern and controlling, stepped closer. "We underestimated you," he whispered. Even in these words there was respect, but also a silent acknowledgement of past mistakes. I nodded politely, but I knew I couldn't let the past define my boundaries. "No more insults," I said calmly. "No more comparisons. If you want a relationship with me, it must be built on respect. If not, I'm okay walking away." Neha wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, almost inaudible. I gave a small, quiet nod. I didn't need drama. I didn't need validation. I had already won. Not in the way they expected, but in the way that mattered most. I had claimed my own dignity, my own life. I picked up my coat and stepped outside into the cool night air. The warmth of my family's dining room faded behind me, but I felt no emptiness. Instead, there was peace and a quiet, hard-earned pride. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the loser. I felt like the person I had always worked to become. Because in the end, I realized I didn't lose a family that didn't value me. I gained myself. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Tell me in the comments, and please subscribe to our channel.